Hello, beautiful faces. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. To live free, you have to think free, which means stepping outside of our American media bubble. So I'm excited to bring to you a conversation I recently had with Ahmed Maher. Ahmed is originally from Cairo, Egypt, and currently he resides in London, England, where he's the senior political editor for Majallah, one of the largest media outlets in the Middle East. Prior to that, he worked for Al Jazeera English, and before that, he spent over a decade at the BBC reporting on the Middle East. I became familiar with Ahmed's work more recently through Twitter, where I saw his reporting on Israel and Palestine, and I was very impressed. Not only has he been on the ground to actually see for himself what is going on, but the way that he's able to recognize his bias and take a step back and report objectively on what is happening from multiple perspectives. And he always has a very human element, as you will see in our conversation, to his stories. Rather than just the cold geopolitics of the situation, we can really put ourselves in the shoes of people young and old, on the Israeli side, on the Palestinian side, and always weaving in historical context so we can really understand how this situation has evolved over the past decades. In our conversation, he discusses some of his recent reporting, including a love story between a young Israeli Jewish woman and a young Palestinian Muslim man. He also highlights much less reported aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, such as the demolition, or often self-demolition, that is forced upon Palestinians in Jerusalem. Additionally, we summarize the historical context of this conflict since 1948, including the peace deal between Egypt and Israel in 1979 that could possibly serve as a model for peace moving forward. I highly recommend following Ahmed on Twitter. I have it linked in the description down below, along with his articles which we reference in this video. And while you're down there, be sure to hit that like button. If you're new, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. And I want to know what your thoughts are, so leave a comment. And now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Ahmed Maher.
Ahmed, thank you so much for joining me here today in these very contentious times. I wanted to start off by having you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your work. I became familiar with your work on Twitter and really appreciate the international perspective, the seriousness of your journalism, and how you strive to be objective. So please just tell us about who you are, your background, and the work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's a pleasure. And thanks for your kind words. Actually, I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist, a Middle East journalist since 2002, 2003, when I started in my home city, Cairo. So I am British Egyptian. I'm originally Egyptian. You can say I'm 28-year-old Egyptian and 16-year-old British. So the Middle East has been the focus of my journalism and writing since 2003. I started in Cairo, as I said, then I joined the BBC in 2008, 2009 as a broadcast journalist with BBC Arabic Service and BBC World Service. Then I became a bilingual reporter and correspondent for the BBC for 12 years in my native Arabic and English. Then I joined the National. It's the one of the biggest English-speaking media outlets in the Arab world in Abu Dhabi for 2 years. Then I had a stint with Al Jazeera English television as a Jerusalem correspondent on a freelance basis for a couple of months before joining the Saudi Research and Media Group Majallah, which is the leading in-depth publication, not just in Saudi Arabia, but in the Arab world. We are providing in-depth analysis in Arabic, mainly in Arabic, but also we have an English version. I'm with Majallah for a year and 2 months exactly now as the senior political editor of Majallah. So that's my background in a nutshell, actually.
Yes, and at the beginning of the show, I read off your entire bio. It's very impressive, and I think it's so
I
important
don't
for
find it impressive.
I mean, you started when I was just a kid in middle school, so you've been at this a while. And like I said, getting the international perspective, I think, is very important. America, we're very much in our own bubble. I know from my own experience going to the Middle East, I've been to Israel, I've been to Palestine, I've been to Egypt as well, including Cairo. And we are exporters of culture. We go over there and everybody knows about what America is doing and American culture and American news. And at that time, Obama was president. So they'd be like, Obama, you know. But we have no idea really about what's going on over there, right? We get certain narratives spun in our media to us. But from my own experience going over there, and from digging beyond the headlines, they don't quite match up. And so right now, of course, unfortunately, we have, I guess it's not technically a war, but an awful conflict that is boiling over these last 6 months. And it's ongoing as we speak. And particularly here in the United States, our attention has been drawn away from it with the student protest movement and the tensions that are boiling there. So I want to refocus on what's going on in Gaza, in Palestine in general, because it's not just in Gaza, it's in the West Bank, it's in in Jerusalem and these other cities that have Palestinian presence. So can you give us, talk about some of the reporting you've been doing lately?
For me as a journalist, the most interesting piece of reporting I did over the past few months was from Jerusalem, and it was from occupied East Jerusalem in particular. It's called. I called it. If it is abnormal in Jerusalem, it is because we are filled with love, and I was inspired to write this article by the love story between a Palestinian young man, he is 22-year-old, and an Israeli Jewish, he's a Palestinian Muslim young man, and an Israeli Jewish young woman. She is 23, 22. And when I wrote the story, they asked for being anonymous. Basically, she is very keen on her privacy. That's her reason. And for the guy, the Palestinian guy, because it is very sensitive for him within the peer pressure and within the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So it was very moving. I mean, to be taken myself in a tour in a district called Nakhlaot in East-West Jerusalem. So it's a Jewish neighborhood. So they took me to this store to in the Hanukkah Jewish festival to light the candles. And you know what? I mean, it started just as a tour on a friendly basis, not on a reporting basis. So it was part of my gathering just to piece together the dots when I start writing. And I was really moved by their very spontaneous and genuine interaction and friendship, love story. I went, actually, I knew them through her dad. So her dad is a friend of mine. He's an Israeli American professor, and he happened to be in Jerusalem that time. And it was a mere coincidence, but this mere coincidence started my whole article. But I found out that it is something of a rarity to find a Palestinian Muslim in love with an Israeli Jew and vice versa. This is something of a rarity in Israel and Palestine. And when I say Palestine here, it is the imaginary Palestine within the pro-Palestine camp, whether they define it in their own borders, their imaginary borders. But I'm talking from my perspective, which is 1967 borders, when Israel occupied the West Bank, including the East Jerusalem, because if I want to explain to your audience, Jerusalem was one city, and in 1948, it was about 48 kilometers west Jerusalem, and the old city in the east, which was about 6.5 or 7 kilometers. So we are talking roughly about 54 kilometers and one Jerusalem. And then came the 1967 war between Israel and Arab countries. And Israel occupied East Jerusalem. Israel occupied and annexed first, and then occupied East Jerusalem. So this is, as back to my point, the main theme of the story, the main plot of the article is love is something of a rarity. And I was inspired to have this headline. If it is abnormal in Jerusalem, it is because we are filled with love, from the story of this guy and this woman. Two different backgrounds, two different cultures. And you know what? It was not what I liked most in their story. It started 4 years ago. So they studied together somewhere in Israel, and they developed this human bond. So this is one example of the kind of reporting I did over the past few months. And this story went on and on through different characters. So I met very interesting character. His name is Zohdi. And he drew my attention to something I myself, as an experienced journalist in the Middle East, I didn't know. He said that coexistence is an absurd term, is an absurd word. You don't have to convert me. It's not love me. It's. You don't have to. We don't have to coexist. He says he believes that coexistence is such an absurd word because you have to accept me as I am. We have to exist. You exist as you are, and I exist as I am. So this coexistence thing, we don't have to coexist. I exist, you exist, you accept me, I accept you. It's kind of love me, love my dog. So it's, and then this is my journey in Jerusalem to connect the dots. So we started from love is something of a rarity, in Jerusalem, and then we go through this coexistence world, which is, according to Zohdi, is a fantasy, to another interesting woman I met in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. She used to believe in existence or coexistence, but she no longer believes. She lost faith after the response, the ferocious response, and the conduct of the Israel Defense Forces in Gaza. She lost faith in the coexistence. So this is a third example in the story, in my storytelling or my connecting the dots structure of the examples that sum up the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And then I take the readers in my journey or my storytelling through the very important symbol in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a security wall as called by Israel and apartheid wall as called by the Palestinians, or separation wall if someone wants to euphemize the word apartheid. But I'm just telling you the two narratives here. But this separation wall or security wall is a very important symbol. Why? Because it symbolizes a very important political strategy that has been followed by Israel for many, many years, which is how to manage the conflict, but not to resolve it. So it is very metaphorical. You have this wall, which also snakes through Palestinian territories.
Yeah, that was actually for me. Sorry to interrupt you, but I've been to Palestine. I've been to East Jerusalem, both sides of the wall. And that was the thing that really stuck out to me, was the wall is twice as long, I think over twice as long as the actual border, because it weaves in and out. And there's actually houses that are completely cut off from their neighbors. So yeah, that was like, I think that was one of the things that really just changed my whole perspective on what's going on there. But please continue.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the interesting characters I met in my reporting throughout the years was a family, or characters, actually, interesting characters, a family who used to live in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. And then the wall came and sprung up, and then now became out of Jerusalem. And then when they open the window, they see such a massive wall in front of them. So, I mean, this is one of the main aspects, actually, or main metaphors that sum up the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So Israel wanted to manage the conflict, and this is a political strategy, right?
Yeah.
Then I in 2021, for instance, I interviewed the then Israeli Interior Minister, Yalet Shaked, and she told me it was better to leave it that way. And I was asking her about the conflict management strategy. We were not talking about the wall itself, but when you see the wall itself, it symbolizes the conflict management strategy. And then I just recalling this, my interview with Shakid. She left, of course, her post after the collapse of the coalition government that time. And then Benjamin Netanyahu came again to the office. So this is just this world. I summed up the conflict. I told the story of the conflict in just one article. But of course, I don't want to oversimplify the conflict. But I'm just telling you one example of one of the stories that I really hold dear to my heart over the past few months.
Yeah, and that's what I do appreciate about your articles is they're very human focused, right? A lot of these political analysis articles you'll read, they talk about the leaders and they talk about what movements that the armies are doing and the geopolitical implications of things, but the humans are not very present in the stories, but your stories always begin and end with humans, and I think demonstrate sometimes metaphorically and sometimes more literally what is really going on here, right? And so you have this ongoing separation, this coexistence. Maybe we can coexist, maybe we can't coexist. And I was thinking, as you described that Palestinian woman in Ramallah who said that, I don't think that we can coexist anymore after 10/7. I'm also seeing that same reaction from Israelis, from American Jews, from people on the pro-Israel side saying, I used to believe in a two-state solution, but now I don't. Now I don't think we can even discuss peace, right, for the foreseeable future. So that's what's going on in like the Palestine and West Bank and Jerusalem. How is that related to what's going on in Gaza? And because there certainly seems to be some connection there, right? I do think that since things kicked up in Gaza, the intensity all over the West Bank, East Jerusalem has also picked up. So can you tell us a little bit more about the situation directly in Gaza and what that separation looks like on that side of things?
Sure. So basically, I always analyze the present through learning from the past and history. And just to give your audience a very brief context of the Gaza Strip in particular, as I said, and if we start in 1948, right, when Israel was created, and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were either forced to flee their homes, or some of them, they stayed put and they became, in today's Israel, Arab Israelis or Palestinian citizens of Israel, right? So this is the wider picture of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, how it started, right? I mean, the Jews were fleeing a horrible crime in a stain on humanity, which is the Holocaust. And they came and a Jewish state was created because Jews, Muslims, and Christians, they share Jerusalem, right? And they have historical and cultural heritage bonds. And I personally respect that. So this is out of the question. I don't cave into peer pressure from any side, right? So I am a man with principles and with mind. So, but this is the historical context of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The Palestinians call 1948 Nakba in Arabic, which translates into the disaster, right? And every year they commemorate the disaster according to their own terminology and their cultural terminology, the disaster of fleeing their homes and becoming homeless. Some of them, or many of them, ended up in Gaza, right? As refugees in the Gaza Strip. And then it started this incident in history was followed by multiple wars between Israel as a defender or as a challenger. It depends on how you perceive it, right? And Arab countries. We had different wars after the creation of Israel in 1949. We had another war in 1956 between Israel, backed by France and the UK against my home country, Egypt. And another war, 1967 war between Israel and Arab countries, and in 1973 between Israel and my home country, Egypt, mainly, and which led to a historic and very strategic peace agreement signed by Israel and Egypt in 1979. That was signed by late Egyptian President Mohammed Anwar el-Sadat. He took this historic step. So in the very beginning, the Egyptians took the Israelis by surprise, and they destroyed the political doctrine of Israel, because it was a surprise, but it was a massive attack on Israel. Then Israel fought back, and then it was kind of because of the American intervention in favor of Israel. So, I mean, I don't want to get into many details, but I'm just trying to put the context of the Palestinian Arab-Israeli conflict. So
Right.
it has gone through multiple difficult periods. You have one side. So the Jewish state was created, and you have one side that trying to build a state according to the Israeli perspective, right? So I'm not here to take in sides, I'm talking objectively. And so you have a defender or a challenger, it depends on how the people perceive it, and you have a defender and a challenger on the other side. You might have two defenders, you might have two challengers, you might have a challenger and a defender. It depends on how you perceive the conflict. But back to Gaza. In 1967, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, the Golan Heights in Syria. So, but as far as the Gaza Strip is concerned, it remained occupied by Israel till 2005, right? Then Israel took this decision under the then former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, and he decided to disengage unilaterally. So Israel decided unilaterally, it was not within the war context or anything. It decided, or she decided, to leave Gaza, to withdraw from Gaza, right? To a great opposition from mainly the hardliners, the far right, of course, and the religious Zionists. So it withdrew from Gaza Strip in 2008, and then 2 years
Which
on,
includes taking the settlements. Like they had settlements just like how they have in the West Bank. There was Israelis, and typically these are like the more extreme, far right, often religious Israelis, though not all of them are extremely religious. But they not only did they withdraw their troops, they took out the settlements. They uprooted the settlements and they left.
Exactly, as they did in Sinai, in Egypt. So there used to be settlements, Israeli settlements in Sinai, and they dismantled under the peace agreement in 1979, as I mentioned. So Israel did dismantle the settlements, and it can do this today. So, I mean, the settlements are not a stumbling block, because if it did it before in Sinai, and it did it before in the Gaza Strip, so it can do it in the West Bank, but not all of the settlements, right? Because if you haven't been to one of the major settlements in the West Bank, I've been to Ma'ali Adunim, for instance, right? And when you say settlement, people might, I mean, who haven't seen a settlement, an Israeli settlement, they might think of just, a few what do you call it, kiosks, or a few buildings, one-story building. No, I mean, it's massive.
Yeah, it's like in the United States where we have these sort of gated communities, right? You go up and there's like a guard at the gate, and then you go in and they have a few different style houses, and it's like a whole community, and they have their pool and they have their park, and these are very common around the United States where they have these
a massive shopping mall.
Yeah.
I saw myself a massive shopping mall, at least one in Ma'ali Adumim, and as you rightly described it, it's a massive gated community. I would say it's a very posh community, to be honest. I'm not saying
highly subsidized by the government.
Yes, I mean, definitely. I mean, they are giving lots of incentives to Israeli citizens to come and to live in these settlements. Back to your question. I'm sorry if I'm taking too long to answer the question, but I'm trying to break it down, actually, so that the people our audience who are not familiar with the Middle East, you and I are familiar with the Middle East, but your readers need to understand just the context, and then they can read more about it. So then, I mean, there was free and democratic elections between the Palestinians, right? And Hamas was elected in 2007. It was competing against a key Palestinian faction called Fatah, which is represented today by the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. But, I mean, this is a Palestinian internecine conflict, a Palestinian conflict over political ideology, over political aims, over political gains. We are not here to analyze the Palestinian conflict, but this is one aspect of the wider picture. Then they disagreed, and Hamas wanted to stay in power because it won in this election. They disagreed, and they took up arms against one another. Then Hamas took over and controlled the Gaza Strip ever since. This is the context of how Hamas controlled the Gaza Strip, and it has been in control ever since.
Right. And my understanding is also that they ran partially on a religious platform, sure, but they were also running on anti-corruption, right? Because Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, was seen as being very corrupt and essentially in bed with the Israeli government, and they had lost trust in this way with Fatah. And so it's sort of like a protest vote, you could say, in a way, against Fatah, not even for Hamas. That was my understanding of some of the situation. I'm sure there was plenty of people who just believed that they needed change or believed in some of the more religious tenets of it. But like you said, when you have these internal power struggles, there's many different dynamics to it. It's not just black and white, like, oh, they wanted militant Islamists in power and they got it.
No, I think it's yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you in how you describe it and how you analyze it. It's not black and white, and um, uh, both factions, they had people, or they still have people and leaders or political figures who were imprisoned by Israel, who maybe who are regarded as resistance symbols by both sides. For instance, Fatah, you have the emblematic and iconic Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat, who is very respected among many Palestinians as an iconic figure, right? But as you said, it's not black and white. It's not because they voted. Of course, I haven't done a survey myself. Also, I haven't come across a survey to come up with qualitative data and reliable data on their preferences or in their political choices. So, but again, I mean, there was an election, irrespective of the dynamics. But definitely, it was not, as you said, black and white, Islamist versus secular. Because I'll give you just a brief example. I mean, in today's latest data and latest surveys in the occupied Palestinian territories, if an election is held today, most of the Palestinians would vote for Marwan al-Barghouthi.
I'm not familiar. Who's that?
Yeah, Marwan al-Barghouthi is a Fatah leader. And he is secular. He's not an Islamist. He has been always an iconic figure in the Palestinian recent history. He managed to gain the respect of many Palestinians, and it's up to them, actually. So I'm just putting you, it's not my opinion. Mm-hmm. I have to underline and underscore this caveat. I'm just trying to give you a perspective.
Yeah, and that's interesting because as an American, that is, and somebody who I would consider digging deeper than most people, not a name I had heard. What we hear in the United States is that Hamas is more popular than ever, right? That I think there's a polls going around from post October 7th saying that the support for Hamas has gone up, and there's no mention really of other factions that could, besides Fatah, generally speaking, but no leaders in specific. People know Anwar. I don't remember his last.
So that's
Sinwar, I'm talking about.
Yes, Sinwar. Yeah.
Yes. People know that name, but that's pretty much it. Like, we don't know any other leaders or anything about these internal politics. So I think this is really important for people to see that it's not just a solid ideological block, that there are other people trying to look for other solutions and other political movements within the Gaza Strip.
You are dealing with deeply rooted factions in the Palestinian fabric. The United States might designate Hamas as terrorists, but it is not designated as terrorists by the Palestinians, right? it might be designated as terrorists by others, by European countries, like by here in the UK, my second home country, but it's more than this, especially for the Palestinians. But back to the, yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Back to keep going with
Back to the Gaza thing and what's going on now in 2024. So we mentioned all the context, and the Palestinians have been living under occupation for many, many years, for many decades. Humiliation, human rights violations by, according to international and reliable human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, like Amnesty International, and not just international human rights organizations, by the Israeli human rights organizations themselves, like B'Tselem, for instance, one of the most respected Israeli human rights organizations. So, I mean, they have been monitoring the occupation for many decades. Then the atrocities of the 7th of October happened. This is from an international perspective. If a country's borders are violated, and if the territories, the internationally recognized territories of a certain country are violated, according to the United Nations Charter, it has the right to defend itself. But the response, to be honest, was quite shocking, and it is still quite shocking, to the extent that Israel now stands accused by UN experts, by human rights activists, by human rights organizations of committing genocide. Even the International Criminal Court says that there is a plausible case of genocide in the Gaza Strip.
Right. And do you think that the escalation that we've seen on the other fronts, so since obviously we've seen a lot of attention on Israel's response in the Gaza Strip, the almost, I think they say 75 to 85% of the buildings have been destroyed, nearly 100% or, upwards of 90% of the population displaced. We've seen starvation tactics used. We've seen all these things be used as evidence of genocide, or the accusations of it, to support those accusations. Do you think that there's also evidence in the escalation we've seen on the other fronts? I know your most recent reporting was about how in Palestinian neighborhoods in Israel proper, that Palestinians are being basically systematically uprooted using different legal tactics. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that and how it can also show some of this intent, whether you want to call it genocide. I think the ethnic cleansing case is a little bit more clear. Can we talk about that a little bit, and how that also reveals some of the intention of the Israeli government?
Yeah, actually, we are referring here to a very alarming phenomenon that has been going on over the past 5 decades, since 1967, in occupied East Jerusalem in particular, which is the demolition of houses, of Palestinian houses. Either it is demolished by the Jerusalem municipality or the Israeli authorities, or by what's called self-demolition. So the Palestinians have to demolish their houses, their own houses themselves. Why? Because it's cheaper. And it's very painful, actually. Imagine that someone is demolishing his or her house themselves because it's just cheaper
And how
than.
would they be forced to do that though? Like who could be like what are the consequences if they don't? What are the legal mechanisms used to say, "Hey, you can no longer live here," and force them to do this?
It is because simply they don't have an alternative planning or development system for their own neighborhoods in the old city. I mentioned in the beginning that the old city is approximately 6.5 or 7 kilometers. So it's very tiny, right? So imagine that the the city, it does not grow in space, whether vertically or horizontally, and the the population is growing. So today you are having approximately 300,000 Palestinians living in occupied East Jerusalem. So the Israeli authorities have not created, on the one hand, have not created a development or urban scheme for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem.
Okay, so basically
On the one
what you
hand,
mean by that is like they haven't told them how they can or cannot build up to accommodate the increase in population.
exactly. I
Okay.
mean, they are not allowed to add more stories or add extensions, annexes to their existing buildings.
And are you say you live in the Jewish quarter or in another section, you would be allowed to.
According to the Israeli laws, everyone is entitled to apply for license, but the reliable and qualitative data by the Palestinian and Israeli specialists indicated that in 99.9% of the Palestinian applications trying to get a license to build new stories or to have extensions are rejected. Unlike or contrary or opposed to or compared to the Israeli citizens, because we are talking about Palestinians who are not citizens of Israel, right? We are talking about Palestinians who are residents in Jerusalem. So they have a special status. They are called Maqdisi in Arabic or Jerusalemite, Palestinian Jerusalemite. Like,
I was told that all the Palestinians in Israel are offered full citizenship, just like Israelis. So this is a new and interesting fact. Okay.
yeah, I just laughed. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I'm not laughing at what you said, but I'm laughing at the idea and the stereotype that you might find it here in the UK, you might find it in the United States or in the West, generally speaking. No, I mean it's not that, it's not the case at all. It's very, I mean, it's a wishful thinking. So back to the main thing is that's how the problem started. So the Palestinians, after failing, and I met people, Palestinians, who applied for and waited for, even I met someone who applied in 1987 and he waited till 1993 before illegally, according to Israel, adding more stories to his building. And we are talking about just 2 stories. We are not talking about skyscrapers or high-rise buildings. We're just talking about 2 stories, maximum 3 stories for him and his family, for his children who are now in their 20s, who got married, who gave birth to children, so on. So we're not talking about a commercial building, a high-rise building, or anything like that.
And this is very common all throughout, I would say, the Middle East, is that families, when a new generation comes, they just add a story on. You'll see often the rebar sticking out, and that's just waiting to add on construction. In the United States here, you turn 18, you move out, you get your own place, but it's much different. So this idea that a family would add on another story to accommodate the next generation is very commonplace.
Yes, I mean, and it's very natural as well. You have to find a way to accommodate your children, your family. It's very important to note that the Palestinians, not just, I mean, the building permit and the difficulty of obtaining a building permit is just one aspect of the restrictions. Another restriction is they can leave Jerusalem, but if they left Jerusalem and they live elsewhere, like just a few meters from East Jerusalem, because it is more affordable in other parts of the West Bank, because Jerusalem is still in the West Bank, but it has a special status. Some people say Jerusalem and the West Bank. No, Jerusalem is in the occupied West Bank. But when you say Jerusalem, because it has a religious and very sacred and special status to Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. So if a Jerusalemite, a Palestinian resident of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, leaves, he has or she has or the family have to leave at the end of the day to get a more affordable accommodation, just 5 meters or 3 meters. I met a family who moved just 3 meters. Can you imagine? From East Jerusalem, or from the administrative borders of Jerusalem, and they lost the right to live or to come back and live in Jerusalem, because according to the relevant Israeli laws, they have to prove that Jerusalem, because of its special status to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, is the center of their life. So if you move outside the perimeters and the administrative boundaries of Jerusalem, which is today we are talking about 70 kilometers compared to just 54 kilometers in 1948, because of the Israel annexed more Palestinian land and so on and so forth. That's why now it's extended into 70 kilometers. So if you move to the kilometer 71, you're out. So they lose their identity as well. And it's very, for me, as if you are telling me you lose your house and your family house in Cairo. That's losing for me as a person, as a human being, as an Egyptian. That's losing my soul, because I'm physically here in the UK, right? I love this country, definitely, but my soul is in Egypt. So it's very hard. It's very hard on someone. It's not just, you know what, Stephanie? It's not just about concrete. It's about your identity. And it's about injustice, to be honest.
So where do we go from here, right? I mean, we're talking about identity, which is a contentious issue, and then you overlay that with land, and then you overlay that with decades now of conflict that you have these competing perspectives of, am I a defender or am I a challenger? Of course, like here in the United States, we have intensifying student protests, and we, at the same time, the United States just sent a, $1 billion package over there. And then I think the next week, like yesterday, they sent another several $1 billion to Israel to keep funding them. So I don't know. How do you see this playing out? I mean, you obviously have a big historical perspective. You've lived through a lot of this in the region. So I don't know. Can you give us any positive news, or what do you got for us?
I think I think we have to start from this war. We are in a war. And the region, not we, not you and I mean, the region is in a war now, right? And we have to analyze the situation from the lessons learned from the contemporary war. You and I, we haven't lived the multiple wars, even the most recent one. I was born in 1979. So I haven't lived even the wars fought by my home country against Israel. I was born and grew up as Israel as an old enemy, but is a taboo in Egypt to talk about Israel. It's a national security issue for the Egyptians, right? But my point is, forget about the security. We're not talking here about the national security or anything about that. But I'm telling you, I was born in a country that signed a strategic peace agreement with Israel. And the late president, who was very brave, he decided to accept Israel, unlike his predecessor, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was very adamant on to not accepting Israel. I will fight. Even he was defeated in 1967. I will not, even Israel, I mean, according to some historical narratives or studies, I would describe it, he was offered Sinai without a war after 1967, but he said, no, I will fight. It's all right. I mean, he wanted to restore the self-respect, which was regained later by the Egyptians in 1973 war, at least in the beginning. So the Egyptians restored their self-respect. But back to forward actually to 2024. So this war will dictate many things in the region, Stephanie. It will define a new doctrine, security doctrine, a new political doctrine for Israel and for the other stakeholders in the region. Everybody will learn. The war will come to an end at some point. All wars ended. And this war will come to an end. But as I said, it will define the security doctrine for Israel, the deterrence doctrine for Israel, the political doctrines for the stakeholders in the region. The Palestinian cause has come to the fore again. Sorry, I'm waving again to the AI.
There you go.
Right. So the Palestinian cause also has come to the fore again. Now you have very young generations in the across the world. They are talking about the Palestinians.
Yeah, and I would say, and it's in a way that during the intifadas, it wasn't, because I was coming of age and I was in college and during those, and I had even been to Israel and was more aware of it, but it didn't break through the mainstream in the way it is now. This is the first time, I would say, in my lifetime that there is a general consciousness, particularly among the youth, but among the American populace at large, that this issue is really to the forefront, especially the Palestinian cause.
And to be honest with you, I mean, it's not because of Hamas, what Hamas did, right? Because what Hamas did is a war crime on October the 7th. From the perspective of international human rights organizations, the same ones that we are citing in our conversation about the atrocities and the war crimes committed by the Israel Defense Forces, according to the same organizations in the Gaza Strip. So the Palestinian cause has not come to the fore and to the public attention again because of what Hamas did on October the 7th. And I talked myself as someone who is following the Middle East politics closely. I did talk to people in Egypt, my home country, whether friends or locals, or I did talk to people in Jordan, in Palestinian territories, and in Syria. I mean, many people that I talked to be honest with you, they were shocked and they don't agree with what Hamas did on October the 7th, simply because you can't kill civilians and you take 250 to your territory in your tunnels and full stop. Even if the wider context of the 1948 or the multiple wars or the occupation, you don't top up over, a war crime or atrocity, maybe, historical atrocities. You don't top up with adding a new atrocity.
Right.
So this is the general sense. Again, I'm trying to give you a general sense of my conversations. And I'm talking with people. It's not about talking to people, like-minded people. Of course, you will find hardliners on both sides, definitely. And I'm not here to give you a statistics or a survey of, I'm not a specialist, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not a pollster, but I'm talking to you from my own observation and from my own conversations. So yeah, this war, as I said, in a nutshell, will dictate and will decide the security, the political. We might find the very first steps for a Palestinian statehood, which is the recognition of the Palestinian right to have an independent state, to live in dignity and freedom, like the Israelis do in Israel. You and I, we went to Israel, right? There is free and there is occupied. So it's as simple as this. When you go to Tel Aviv and go for a walk on the beach and you go for a run on the beach. You can't do this in the West Bank. You can't do this in the Gaza Strip, obviously, right? Now because of the war. Not just because of the space or it's not a walkable city like Ramallah, but it's because it's a stifling. People do not have the passion to do anything, actually. Some people have their escape routes, but this is the general mood. They are living under occupation, and it's very painful, to be honest. I felt it myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. During COVID, I spoke out against the lockdowns, the school closures, all of the different mandates. And part of the power of those things was it just demoralizes you. And just being in the West Bank for the few days that I was there, constantly having to go through checkpoints and show your papers. And yeah, so it seems like in the short term, things are going to remain very, very difficult. It doesn't look like there's an end to the fighting, the atrocities, the land stealing, the inability of both sides to picture coexistence, right? We are in the middle of it, but you do seem a little bit more long-term to think that this will sort of provide a reset to actually come back to the table and have some real conversations, especially now that particularly the American public, but the world in general has seen with their own eyes what the Palestinian perspective is in a way that they haven't, arguably, in my lifetime.
I think you need to have an insurance policy, right?
Okay.
Which is your country, the United States, a very powerful country, economically, politically, militarily, you call it. It's the most powerful country in the world, the most advanced. So I would describe it as such. I mean, you need to have this insurance policy, like what we as Egyptians had in 1979. We had the Americans who pressured Israel into negotiating with the Egyptians. Okay, guys, you sit on the negotiating table and we guarantee this peace. This is a strategic peace for everybody in the region. So to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, you need an insurance policy to two sides who do not trust each other.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like the United States at this point wants to play that role, especially as their hegemony in the world fades and we're in more of a multipolar system now internationally, like zooming out from this conflict. So yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful. I guess I don't like some of the direction that it seems that these student protests are going as they intensify some of their tactics, moving beyond being simply peaceful protests. As the election approaches, it will be interesting to see how public pressure impacts that and impacts America's role, the United States' role in this. It will also be interesting to see how some other international powers may or may not step up to do this. So I try to remain hopeful. In the short term, though, it's definitely not easy. Though, obviously, sitting here in our rooms, looking at each other in the computers, we have to just feel blessed and pray for those who are not in safety right now. So that's what I'll continue to do. I'm going to continue to follow your reporting because I think that international perspective is so important, especially the way that you center humanity. And I encourage everybody to follow you. You're on Twitter. Of course, you publish in your platform. Remind me what it's called again. I can't pronounce
It's called Al-Majallah.
Majallah.
Al-Majallah, which
And I'll have your stuff linked in the description down below so people can
That's right.
connect
Yeah,
to
thank
that.
you. That's very kind. Thank you.
And is there anywhere else that people can find you, or is there any stories that you're working on that they should be looking out for?
Well, no, I'm professionally on Twitter. On Facebook, I share my Strava running.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm doing a marathon next year. Most probably it will be in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, because it's very difficult to raise the fund here in the UK to run the London Marathon.
Okay.
It's very easier in Riyadh to run the marathon. So that's what I'm doing actually outside reporting. Yeah.
All right, awesome. So we'll be cheering for you to cross that finish line. What about reporting? Like, what are you looking at for your next story?
My next story is a secret. It's confidential.
Okay, all right.
So I can't. It's an interview with a prominent Israeli figure.
Oh, okay. That's a good little hint there. Keep us on the edge of our seats.
Right, and a prominent Egyptian figure.
Okay.
Both are politicians. So that's my next story. Another story I'm writing, actually, I started writing it about Israel's smart dictatorship.
Like smart as in like smart technology? Like
No,
smartphones?
I mean,
or...
smart tactics used by Netanyahu, especially Netanyahu, as a case study.
Okay.
So I'm still studying the tactics used by Netanyahu, which meet the criteria of smart authoritarian rule.
Okay, I'll definitely be interested in that. And one of the things I would have, liked to talk to you about, of course, there's only so much and we covered a lot of ground, is I would have been curious to also know more about what's going on in Israel. I've seen massive protests break out there that are less than peaceful. So that's something I would love to learn more about. Maybe another conversation in the future. But I appreciate your time. You've been very,
It's a pleasure, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye, Stephanie. Have a good day.
Bye. You too.
Thank you for checking out this conversation. I don't think there are many places in the American media landscape where you're going to hear this perspective. So make sure you share it with your friends. Tell them this is something that they should really consider in their analysis of what's going on between Israel and the Palestinians. And also help me out with that algorithm. Make sure you've hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and you have notification bells hit. And leave a comment to let me know your thoughts. Until next time, live free, think free, and give all the glory to God.